The slave market on Kepler Station reeked of desperation and disinfectant. James pulled his worn jacket tighter, the fabric barely concealing the energy pistol at his hip. His boots, held together more by hope than leather, clicked against the metal grating as he moved through the crowd of buyers, most of them wealthy merchants from the core worlds, their biosuits gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. He shouldn't be here. Hell, he could barely afford the docking fee for his rust bucket freighter, let alone participate in an auction where single lots went for more credits than he'd see in a lifetime of hauling cargo between backwater colonies. But Liza had been insistent when she'd intercepted the trafficking ring's communications. "James, you have to see this," she'd said, her fingers dancing across the holographic display in their ship's cramped cockpit. Her auburn hair had fallen across her face as she leaned forward, green eyes reflecting the data streams. Two Zelhari children, sisters, they're going to be separated. The Zelhari were a dying species. Their homeworld strip-mined by the consortium decades ago. Their people scattered across the galaxy as refugees or worse. These two girls, barely old enough to walk upright on their digitigrade legs, represented something precious beyond measure. Their large, luminous eyes held an intelligence that made James's chest tighten with protective fury. Now, as he stood in the auction house's gallery, James watched those same eyes dart frantically between each other as the two sisters were led to separate display platforms. The younger one, perhaps 4 in human years, let out a keening wail that cut through the murmur of potential buyers like a plasma cutter through hull plating. "Lot 847, announced the Vorthak auctioneer, his translator device rendering his clicks and whistles into cold mechanical standard. Zelhari female, age approximately 2.3 standard years. Excellent for light labor, domestic service, or research applications. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits. 50,000. James's entire net worth wouldn't cover half of that even if he sold his ship. He gripped the bidding paddle until his knuckles went white, watching as various aliens raised their own paddles with casual indifference. The price climbed steadily, 60,000, 75, 90. At 120,000 credits, only 2 bidders remained active. James recognized one of them, a consortium executive whose biomodifications had cost more than most planets' annual budgets. The other was a Kethmori, his 6 arms allowing him to bid while simultaneously conducting business on multiple communication devices. "That's Veltar the Collector," whispered a nearby Andorian trader. "Heard he keeps exotic specimens for entertainment. Poor little thing won't last a month." James's jaw clenched. He'd heard the stories about Veltar, how he treated sentient beings like amusing pets until he grew bored, then discarded them in ways that made slavery look merciful. The Kethmori's final bid, 140,000 credits. Once, called the auctioneer. James closed his eyes, thinking of his ship, the Defiant Hope, that had been his home for 15 years. He thought of the repairs she needed, the cargo contracts he'd have to break, the debts he'd accumulate. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the younger sister's terrified face. 200,000, James called out, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. Every head in the auction house turned toward him, the Kethmori's 4 eyes fixed on James with predatory interest, while the consortium executive's modified features twisted into something approximating amusement. "The human wishes to play?" Veltar's voice was like grinding glass. "How quaint. 210,000. 250. James replied immediately, his heart hammering against his ribs. 300,000. James's mouth went dry. He was already committing financial suicide, but as he looked at the older sister, maybe 6 years old, pressed against the energy barrier of her display cage and reaching desperately toward her sibling, he knew there was no going back. 500,000 credits. The auction house erupted in whispers and electronic chatter. Veltar's mandibles clicked with what James hoped was surprise rather than amusement. The Kethmori studied James for a long moment, those predatory eyes calculating. "The human is either very wealthy or very stupid," Veltar mused. "Perhaps both. 700,000. James felt sweat beading on his forehead. He had one card left to play, something he'd never told Liza about. something he'd been saving for the darkest possible moment. 1.2 million credits, he said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. Veltar's eyes widened, and for the first time since the bidding had started, the Kethmori hesitated. 1.2 million was serious money, even for someone of his resources. After a moment that stretched like eternity, he lowered his paddle. Lot 847, sold to the human for 1.2 million credits, announced the auctioneer. Lot 848 will commence momentarily. But James was already moving toward the payment terminal, his legs feeling like liquid mercury. As he transferred the contents of his emergency account, money he'd been saving for 20 years, credits earned, from the most dangerous runs in the galaxy, he felt Liza's hand slip into his. She'd been watching from the back of the crowd, he realized, always watching, always ready to support him even when his decisions made no financial sense. The older sister, she whispered. I've got enough left for her, James lied. He had maybe 50,000 credits remaining, nowhere near enough for the second child. But as they moved toward the next lot, Liza squeezed his hand. Actually, she said with a small smile, I've been hiding some savings too. Had to keep some mad money away from your noble impulses. When the older sister's bidding closed at 300,000 credits, split between James's remaining funds and Liza's secret stash, both humans found themselves the proud legal guardians of two terrified Zelhari children. Later, as they sat in the Defiant Hope's cargo hold, watching the sisters huddled together in a makeshift bed of emergency blankets, James calculated their new reality. They were broke, deeply in debt, and now responsible for two traumatized children of an endangered species. We're idiots, he said softly. Complete idiots, Liza agreed, settling beside him. But they're together. The younger Zelhari made a soft chirping sound in her sleep, and her sister's arm tightened protectively around her. In that moment, as James watched two children sleep safely in the knowledge that they wouldn't be separated, he decided that being an idiot wasn't such a bad thing after all. Humanity had always been good at making terrible financial decisions for the right reasons. It was perhaps their greatest strength in a galaxy that too often measured worth in credits rather than compassion.